Mission accomplished. A Chinese capsule carrying soil and rock samples collected from the moon returns to Earth. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. China is now the third country in the world to successfully bring back samples from the moon. The Chang'e-5 landed in North China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region to the delight of scientists and explorers. A ground team successfully reached the site to retrieve the samples. Researchers are hoping the material will give them insight into the moon's history and evolution. For more on China's historic mission, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Orlando, Florida, is John Zarrella. He's a distinguished journalist who covers the United States space program. Also with us from Austin, Texas, is Stephen Clark. He's an editor with Spaceflight Now. From Sunnyvale, California, Ray Wang is the principal analyst and founder of Constellation Research. And from Beijing, Yansong is the Director General of the Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Yansong, let me start with you. So the capsule is now back on Earth and in fact landed on snow-covered ground in the middle of the night, a winter's night in Inner Mongolia. How difficult was that last part of the mission?
Well, that was very challenging, but we have fully confidence that this can be coming back, because back in 2014 we have done a testing, a very same testing of recovering a capsule at a high velocity of roughly 11 kilometers per second, and that testing was successful, and so was last night. And we had witnessed the international cooperation partnership with the European space agencies and many other partners in the international space community supporting the telemetry tracking and control of the return of the capsule. And that was a very smooth landing on a very cold weather in Inner Mongolia.
Right, and as I understand it, Yansong, one of the most challenging aspects of this landing is the re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere.
Exactly. The speed that coming back from the moon to Earth is roughly 11 kilometers per second. That is very close to the second cosmic speed. So we have to use the atmosphere to slow down the capsule before the real re-entry. So the skip re-entry was performed on the northeast part of above the northeast part of the Africa continent, and then we had the capsule down to 60 kilometers, and then bounced back to the outer atmosphere, and then coming back in again, entering the atmosphere from the Tibetan areas, and landed on Inner Mongolia territory. So it was very challenging mission last night.
John Zarrella, Chang'e landed on the moon on December 1st to collect moon rocks, dust samples from the surface of the moon. It also sent a probe down 6 feet into the surface of the moon to collect samples from there. You have covered space exploration for a long time. What's your assessment of this mission so far?
Well, I mean, it's hugely successful. There's no doubt about it. You know, not just from the potential scientific information that they'll be studying for years and years in order to, because they believe that the area of the moon, the Sea of Storms where they went, is much younger. Volcanic activity took place there within 1 million years of now, whereas where the Apollo astronauts and where the Russian spacecraft landed back in '76, that material that came back, hundreds of pounds that the U.S. astronauts brought back, is at least 3 million years old. So there's going to be a tremendous value in evaluating that, but not just the scientific benefits that they will get. You've got to look at the technological advances and how this is, just another step in the evolutionary process by the Chinese space program in order to eventually land humans on the moon and to set up a permanent moon base there, which is the same thing that NASA is hoping to do in the mid to late 2020s. So it's an incremental step. but it's a next step. And it's to prove the different technologies, to prove that you can do it, and clearly they did it.
Stephen Clark, John just mentioned the technological advances that have been made with this mission. What can you tell us about that? What was the kind of technology that was used for this mission that didn't exist, I guess, more than 40 years ago when that last Soviet mission went up in the 1970s?
Well, one thing I would highlight is the automated rendezvous and docking between two spacecraft at the moon that the Chang'e-5 mission accomplished. So the Lunar 24 mission, which was the last robotic spacecraft to return samples from the moon from the Soviet Union in 1976, it actually launched directly from the moon to come back to Earth with its samples. Chang'e-5 had an additional step in there that wasn't really required for this mission, but the Chinese did want to demonstrate the capability to launch a spacecraft from the moon's surface and be able to link up with another spacecraft in orbit around the moon. And this is the first time two uncrewed spacecraft have performed an automated docking in orbit around the moon. And this is a key step for a future crew mission to the moon with astronauts for the Chinese. And it's the same sort of step that NASA followed with the Apollo missions of the 1960s and 70s, where they launched the crew off the moon and linked up with a command module in orbit around the moon before coming back to Earth. Except the difference is those missions were performed with crew, with a pilot in the loop to command the spacecraft, and Chang'e-5 did it on autopilot, essentially.
Ray Wang, as Stephen just pointed out, this is the first time scientists have, in fact, retrieved samples of moon rock from the moon's surface since the Soviet mission in 1976. And this, as John Zarrella pointed out as well, was from a different part of the moon's surface, from the Sea of Storms. What will scientists be able to learn from these rocks?
I think what they're trying to find out is really the formation. This is the youngest part of the moon. This is the last, or presumably the last volcanic eruption on the moon. And that part might have some clues as to how the universe was formed. It might have some different mineral compositions. It might give us some indication of what other events have happened while the Earth was around, and these were being captured by whether it's a meteoroid that's landed there, whether it's a different set of elements, whether it might be helium-3 in different places that might indicate water or indicate fuel in the future. So I think those were part of that in the discovery. The other piece that's interesting really is a demonstration of some of that robotic technology to be able to continue to do the excavation, and more importantly, the mineral exploration that could potentially happen if you were to put a space station there or put a base there. And I think that's also one of the things that we're learning from this as well.
Yeah, Ray, we're talking about excavation here. So it was basically robotic technology that was used to gather up these rocks, put them into a container, and then I guess seal the container airtight for its trip back to Earth.
It is, and it's a confluence of technologies that we're seeing on display here. It's artificial intelligence, it's robotics, it's the ability to command by wire, it's the ability to actually do all these in an automated sequence. It's also learning and doing the adjustments in real time. These are things that we had to do with manual calculations since in the last mission, right? Now these are all automated, and it's actually showing the ability, like even drone technology advancements have actually all pulled into this. And what this is kind of a capstone of being able to test out new and emerging technologies and then bring them back to commercial usage, kind of like the U.S. space program and the Russian space program did for their economies.
Yansong, of course, this is a big achievement for China. I mean, if you think about China, just 40 years ago, it was struggling to feed its people. A lot of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in poverty. They were all brought out of poverty, of course. In fact, President Xi Jinping sent his congratulations to the mission commanders. He said it marks a major step toward China's aerospace industry and will contribute to deepening mankind's scientific understanding of the origin of the moon and the evolution of the solar system. The motherland and people will always remember your outstanding contributions. So China joins the select club of nations, Yansong, that has been to the moon, collected samples. Can you give us a sense of how people in the country are feeling about this?
Well, proud, of course. That's the essence of the whole thing. We're seeing a huge fan of crowd that is gathering in the internet and online to witness the whole thing, and so it's a strong spirit for the nation. And I think, as President Xi pointed out, that this is an achievement of the Chinese people and the technology. However, I think in the future steps, we need to have international cooperation. And in international cooperation, indeed, we had Chang'e-4 and Chang'e-5 all had international support, either from TTNC, telemetry tracking and control, and many others supporting facilities. So I think in the future, we need to step up international cooperation.
Right, and Yansong, while you were talking, we were looking at pictures there of that capsule on the ground. What are the next steps? At what point will these rocks be extracted, and where will they be taken to?
The capsule returned at 1:59 Beijing time, and then it was a very chilly weather, -30 and very windy in Inner Mongolia. So the rescue and search crew and also the crew from the traveling on land has arrived at the scene, and they will examine the integrity of the capsule, and then they will start shipment of the capsule. I think the next step would be transport this capsule to a secure location where it will be fixed and transported back to Beijing before they open the capsule itself. So the opening of the sample should be done in a controlled environment. So this will be done very carefully. So next step, we'll be transporting the capsule back to Beijing.
John Zarrella, Yansong just mentioned the international cooperation on these space missions. Of course, NASA is precluded from joining the Chinese on these missions. That's because of laws here in the United States that prevent that kind of cooperation. But in the future, do you see more cooperation?
Well, I think there's going to have to be at some point, and I know that Charlie Bolden, the former NASA administrator, was very much a proponent of going ahead and trying to break the ice, get relationships going with the Chinese, with China on space. But yeah, NASA is prohibited. They're not allowed to do anything. And what they say is it's Congress, because Congress says that there's a concern that the Chinese space program is tied too much to the Chinese military. So that seems to be the rationale for that. But yeah, clearly going for it. If you're going to be going to Mars, for instance, at some point down the road, you're going to have international cooperation. And, most of the people, particularly the former astronauts and as I said, Charlie Bolden, believe that China ultimately will have to be a part of that, because both financially and technologically, it's going to be an enormous challenge. One thing I want to point out that we don't want to get lost today is that the Trump administration signed a space policy directive today, which they want to use nuclear power to establish nuclear power, plant on the surface of the moon as a test bed, and then perhaps use it as propulsion to go to Mars. And the reason for that is because you need something that you don't have to carry heavy fuel. It's just too cost prohibitive to try and build a spacecraft and fly to Mars that way. So this is actually pretty big news that's coming out. We'll have to see how that shakes out. Now, NASA does that right now with radioisotope thermoelectric generators, RTGs. They're small nuclear power plants they use. In fact, the Mars 2020 lander that's on its way right now will be powered by one of these RTGs. They've done it on a lot of deep space missions where it's just too difficult. You don't have the sun, you can't use solar. But, that's one of the things that could be a big player. Of course, nuclear is very controversial, but going forward, we're going to have to see how that shakes out.
John, talking about deep space exploration, getting to Mars, how important are these moon missions in that greater goal of getting to Mars? I mean, is this a sort of stepping stone or a launching pad for those missions that will go to Mars?
It's definitely a stepping stone, because you're going to want to see how astronauts handle longer durations on the surface of another world. So the moon is the perfect place to do that. You can do that because if you run into problems, you've only got a 3 to 4 day journey to get home and get the astronauts home safely. So you can test that. You can test technologies like advanced rover technologies. You can test technologies for perhaps trying to make fuel on the surface of the moon, which you might likely have to do on Mars if you were setting up a base there. Extracting water from the surface of the moon. There's not a lot there, but there are technologies being developed that they might be able to take maximum advantage of what water is on the moon. So clearly it's a stepping stone. Clearly we're not ready to go to Mars yet for all kinds of reasons. And this will be a test bed. The moon will definitely be a test bed for Mars exploration.
Okay, I do want to talk about water, but first we're going to take a break. More of our conversation about China's space program and what's next for 2021. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat.
All you need to know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
The world's currencies are more connected than ever before. The mechanisms that drive the economy are universal. Money moves markets. We explain these trends and show you how the cash in your pocket can have a wide-reaching effect. Because money makes the world go round. Global business.
Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing China's historic mission to the moon. A capsule with lunar samples landed safely in China's Inner Mongolia region on Wednesday, completing a 23-day journey. Well, let's get back to our panel right now. And Stephen, I'm going to start with you for this part of the show. We were talking about water a moment ago. I'm guessing that we would be able to learn more about the presence of water on the moon with these samples that were brought back by the Chang'e mission. In fact, earlier this year, NASA scientists established that there is water on the moon. It was found trapped within mineral grains on samples that had been brought back. Why is this important for us?
Well, I think any permanent base on the moon, be it U.S. or Chinese or some sort of international collaboration, they're going to want to be able to use the resources on the moon to sort of live off the land. And one resource on the moon would be water. Scientists believe there's vast amounts of water locked up in the lunar polar regions, particularly inside craters that never see sunlight. So these are like cold traps where water can freeze and stay stable for millions of years. And so a future lunar base, a future moon base, astronauts could actually go in and harvest this water and process it in a facility on the moon to create breathing air, to create drinking water, create rocket fuel even for landers going back and forth between the moon and an Earth or perhaps a space station somewhere around the moon. So finding the water, following the water is a key part of the strategy of any space agency that wants to set up a permanent establishment on the moon. And there's water scattered, there's water in these grains all around the moon, but the big reserves are in the polar regions. And that's where NASA wants to send astronauts back to the moon to land near the South Pole in the 2020s, near one of these craters that holds these big reserves of water. And in fact, China, the next mission, Chang'e-6, is targeted to land also near the South Pole region, where scientists have found evidence of these large quantities of water.
And Stephen, this technology to harvest the water, as you say, on the moon, does it already exist?
Well, it exists to a certain extent, although it hasn't really been fully tested in space at the scale that NASA or any mission designer would want to be able to prove it works before you commit to building a lunar base. But one of the first things NASA is looking at is how to actually locate and harvest the water to sort of mine the resource in the first place. And NASA is sending a rover called Viper to the moon in a couple of years to land somewhere near the South Pole and actually drive into one of these cold traps in one of these craters to get the first up close look at the water to see what kind of state it's in. to start figuring out how to mine it and extract it from the soil and start processing it. So that's one of the first steps, and NASA is pretty far along in developing that rover. And yeah, it should be launching in a couple of years to the moon to sort of take the first big step toward realizing that.
Ray Wang, is it China's goal in the future to establish some kind of permanent or semi-permanent human presence on the moon?
I think that's part of the goal. There's more to it. First is to get a international type of lunar space station on the moon and get that established. And once you have that as a base, you can use that as a jumping off point to other parts, whether you want to go to Mars, whether you want to do deep space exploration, whether you want to keep another version of an international space station that's floating around to actually be a supply route, be a conduit, be a jumping off point. And I think that's the important part is these are going to be automated missions. What we've seen between SpaceX and what we've seen with the Chang'e-5 mission is the fact that we can now get this to an automated state. We don't know how well the reliability is going to be, but they're going to be working on that. And that level of precision that's required for space missions is actually being automated. And I think that's the big jumping off point. Once you have that, we now have the ability to actually start getting materials into space, getting all the infrastructure that's required for a lunar space station, and being able to use that as a place to start exploration instead of coming from Earth, but coming off from the moon.
Yansong, we were talking about exploration in deep space and trips to Mars. China is also involved in that race to Mars. What can you tell us about that?
Well, as we speak, the Tianwen-1, which is the Mars probe from China, has already launched a few months back and should be arriving at the same time with the American and the UAE probe at the same time in February to Mars orbit. And the Chinese Mars mission is different because we are using this as the first mission. However, we use this mission with we put an orbiter, a lander, and rover at the same time. So it's very ambitious for China. We know that in history there's an experience of a failure for the first time. Whoever goes to Mars. But we certainly hope that this mission will be successful, and based on the Chang'e-5 mission, the future mission of Mars sample return could be realized very soon.
John, of course, when we talk about space exploration, we talk about organizations like NASA, like the China Space Agency. These are state organizations with money and resources to engage in this kind of exploration. But what about the private sector? What about companies like SpaceX? Is their involvement going to get bigger?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about it. We were talking about autonomous vehicles and all. You know, the Crew Dragon that's now flying, this for the second time with astronauts taking them to the space station, is pretty much fully autonomous. Now, the astronauts have the power to override the autonomy if necessary, but that Crew Dragon can get you to the space station all by itself. They don't have to touch anything. And as far as the advancements in the technology, everything is touchscreen inside that spacecraft, so amazingly different. And we also know that SpaceX just tested what they hope will be their moon rocket, or a rocket that will take their crews ultimately to Mars. And it came back down. It didn't land. It actually exploded, but it was considered a successful test because they'll learn a lot about it. But so yeah, people like SpaceX, people like Blue Origin are going to be in it for the long haul. Some of the companies that are going to be doing space tourism, they're in it for, and that also includes both Blue Origin and SpaceX. So a lot of things you're going to see coming in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But clearly, Elon Musk and SpaceX, he's got his sights set on going to the moon with his spacecraft and ultimately going to Mars. He says within the next 6 years. We've talked about this before. That seems pretty unrealistic.
Ray Wang, we were talking about technology earlier on. What are the technologies in space exploration that were not there when humans first went to the moon?
Oh, there are a number of space technologies that were in there, but I think the control systems have gotten better. You see what goes up in terms of the power that's used, in terms of the compute power that's used to, control these systems. I mean, we've gone from like big, mainframes to like chips that are so small that can be used as sensors all across the board. That sensing technology is being used. We've looked at propulsion technology that's completely changed. We've also seen material science improve as well in terms of lighter weight materials, and we've got the ability to actually, have the telemetry that we didn't have in the past. And many of these calculations are not manually calculated on a slide rule. So a lot has changed in 4 decades. I think the amazement here is that a lot of those technologies are now consumer-grade technologies that are available to us. And there is so much potential for a mission to anywhere, for Mars or to the moon, for those technologies to cascade back into the commercial world.
Stephen, there was something else I was reading about space exploration, and that is something known as cislunar. That is the space between Earth and the moon. And Chinese scientists, see the potential for what they call human living space. What do we know about that?
Yeah, cislunar space is basically just a term for the space in the vicinity of the moon. And NASA has plans to return humans to the moon sometime in the next decade. And a key part of NASA's strategy for going back to the moon is to build a mini space station in orbit around the moon. They call it the Gateway. And the thought is that the Gateway station could be sort of a waypoint between Earth and the moon's surface, so they could actually send astronauts to this Gateway space station in cislunar space. They could stay there for a couple of days, stock up, and then float into a lander that's docked to the space station, go to the moon's surface, do their mission on the moon, launch back to the Gateway, and then use that again as a waypoint on the way back to Earth. And so NASA is planning to launch the first pieces of this Gateway in 2023, 2024, I believe, although that may be delayed at some point. But so the scientists, NASA wants to use the cislunar space sort of as a waypoint to go from the moon, and that's really key to the idea of sustainability, to building a permanent moon base on the lunar surface, and using the Gateway as a refueling post, as a waypoint, as sort of a stocking room for that moon base.
Right. John Zarrella, I've just got less than a minute left. We are, of course, coming to the end of the year, 2020. What are the big markers that you'd be looking for in 2021 as far as space exploration is concerned?
Oh, I think there's no question about it. It's the landers that are going to Mars, to United Arab Emirates, NASA, and of course China's lander. How successful are they? And they will be the precursors, certainly, of sample return missions from Mars. Those are really key milestones coming up pretty quickly.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.